The Tesla Model 3 gleamed under the October sun like a trophy, and Marcus Chen had every right to feel proud. He'd saved for 7 years, skipping vacations, declining promotions that required relocation, turning down nights out with friends. The electric vehicle represented more than transportation. It was proof that his disciplined life meant something, that all those choices had paid off. The charger installation had cost him another $3,200, professionally mounted on the concrete pad between his house and the property line. He'd even hired an electrician to run a dedicated circuit from the main panel, meeting every code requirement, paying for everything out of his own account. The neighborhood HOA had given him a certificate of approval, framed and hanging in his home office. For 9 months, everything had been perfect. Then Diane moved in next door. She was beautiful in that aggressively curated way. Blown-out blonde hair, designer athleisure, the kind of woman who ordered oat milk lattes on her phone while shopping. Marcus had seen her type before in the tech industry, where he'd worked for 15 years before going independent as a software consultant. She was the ex-wife of a venture capitalist, recently divorced, and what the neighborhood gossip suggested was a financial bloodbath. The kind of ending where someone wakes up and realizes they've been slowly suffocating for a decade. He'd waved at her during move-in day. She'd ignored him. The first incident happened on a Wednesday morning when he went out to check the charger display screen. A silver Mercedes sat in his driveway, nose pointed at his charging unit, clearly attempting to reach it. The cord wasn't connected, but the positioning was deliberate, almost territorial. Marcus walked back inside and called the non-emergency police line. It seemed excessive, but he needed documentation. The officer, a woman in her 50s who looked like she'd heard worse, suggested he simply ask the neighbor to move the car. He did that evening. Diane answered the door in workout clothes, slightly flushed, holding a green smoothie. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she'd said, and she sounded genuinely apologetic. "I was trying to figure out if I could use it. My car is dying on its last battery, and I'm honestly kind of freaking out about it. I haven't even gotten my charging installed yet." Marcus felt the resistance in his chest soften. She was nervous, genuinely stressed. He recognized that particular flavor of anxiety, the one that came from financial pressure. "The thing is," he heard himself saying, "it's not really set up for shared use. The wiring's specific to my vehicle, and if there's any issue—" "I completely understand," she'd interrupted, but her smile had cooled. "Never mind. I'll figure it out." He'd offered to help her research options for her driveway, but she'd said she was fine, thanks anyway, and closed the door. He'd felt slightly guilty for a few hours, then moved on. 2 weeks passed quietly. Then came the evening when Marcus returned from a client meeting to find Diane's Tesla Model Y parked in his driveway, connected to his charger. The battery indicator showed 45% charge. The car hummed softly, drawing power that he was paying for. His hands went cold. He photographed everything, timestamp visible on his phone, the charger display showing the voltage draw, her license plate. Then he knocked on her door hard enough that she opened it with caution, her phone already in her hand like she was ready to call someone. "Your car is connected to my charger," he said. Keeping his voice level, she didn't even blink. "I know. You need to disconnect it. That charger is for my vehicle. Marcus, come on!" She stepped outside, barefoot despite the October chill, wearing an expensive-looking cashmere wrap. "I charged your car the one time I asked, and you acted like I'd committed a crime. I'm next door. I'm driving an electric car. You've got infrastructure I don't have yet. This is basic neighborly stuff. That's not how property rights work." "Actually," she said, and something shifted in her expression. Something colder, more calculated. "In California, anything installed on or appurtenant to residential property during a marriage or domestic partnership is considered community property. Even after separation, the courts have been expanding that definition." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "We're not married." "No, but you're not on your property line either. That charger is installed on what could arguably be interpreted as the boundary space between our properties. And more importantly," she stepped closer, "you're in an HOA. HOAs have obligations to provide shared amenities to all residents. You should read your covenant restrictions. I have read them. Then you know that Section 4.7 states all utility installations must consider the communal benefit of the neighborhood. She smiled. I looked it up. Marcus's hands clenched. The charger isn't a communal utility. It's mine. Disconnect from it tonight, or I'm calling the police to report theft of services. He walked back to his house without waiting for a response. He could feel her watching him, feel the weight of her judgment. That night, he checked his electricity meter 3 times. The car stayed plugged in until 11 p.m. The next morning, he filed a report with the HOA board. He also took screenshots of his electricity bill to establish what his normal usage was. 2 days later, he received an email from the HOA board president, a man named Gerald who worked in insurance and had the personality of beige drywall. The email was diplomatic, which meant someone had already been lobbied. After careful consideration of the covenants and in the spirit of neighborhood harmony, we'd like to suggest a shared cost arrangement for charging station usage. This would benefit our community's sustainability goals and establish us as a model for progressive neighborhoods. Ms. Diane Morrison has indicated a willingness to contribute $75 monthly toward the installation's maintenance and electricity. Marcus read it 3 times. Each time feeling his face get hotter, he called Gerald directly. That's my property. I paid for it. I'm not running a business here. I understand your frustration, Gerald said with the practiced tone of someone trained in conflict resolution. But the board has reviewed the covenants, and there's genuine ambiguity here. As a gesture of good faith, we're suggesting a compromise. It keeps everyone happy. I'm not happy with this compromise. Then we may need to escalate this to mediation. Marcus hung up. He called a lawyer. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Priya Kapoor who specialized in property disputes, listened to his explanation with her fingers steepled and her eyes narrowed in thought. The HOA argument is weak, she said finally. You're right. That charger is your personal property, and the communal benefit clause doesn't apply to individual installations that you funded entirely. However, she raised a finger, the California law she mentioned about property appurtenancy is more complicated than she's making it sound. And if she can convince the board that you're operating a de facto charging station available to residents, they might try to force shared use terms. Can they? Not legally, but fighting them in court over an HOA dispute is expensive, usually between $15,000 and $30,000, depending on complexity. Could be more if they bring in their own counsel. Marcus felt something in his chest compress. $30,000. That was 6 months of profit on his consulting business. That was stress testing every financial cushion he'd built. What if I just tell her she can't use it anymore? Physically restrict access? You could, Priya said carefully. But she's already established precedent by using it. She could argue abandonment or implied consent. And if she decides to take this seriously, if she really wants to push, she could file a complaint with the county claiming unsafe charging practices. Bring in building inspectors, escalate through the HOA formally. It gets messy. So she has leverage because she's willing to be aggressive. She has leverage because you're conflict-averse and she isn't. That stung, but it was true. He called his insurance company to document the situation with his homeowners policy. They told him there was no coverage for HOA disputes unless there was property damage or liability claims. Then he sent Diane a certified letter prepared by Priya, stating that she had no right to use the charger and that any further use would be considered theft of services and trespassing. Diane's response came 48 hours later. A formal letter from a law firm he'd never heard of, arguing exactly what she'd mentioned, that the charger might constitute community property under California's family law statutes, that the HOA's sustainability mandate created implied shared use rights, and that Marcus's discriminatory exclusion of a neighbor with an electric vehicle violated the spirit of the neighborhood's green initiative. They were asking for mediation and threatening court action if he continued to deny access. Marcus sat in his home office. The letters spread across his desk and felt something he'd rarely experienced, genuine panic. His controlled, carefully managed life was suddenly uncertain. He called Priya back. This is insane. She's a neighbor, not a spouse, I know, but she has enough legal theory to make a judge take this seriously at the hearing stage. And judges in California are sympathetic to property rights disputes when there's ambiguity. The question becomes, what is she really after? What do you mean? Think about it. Is she really desperate to charge her car? There are charging stations all over this area. I saw 3 on the way here. So what does she actually want? Marcus considered this. The answer came quickly. She wanted him to fold. She wanted the upper hand. She wanted to take something she hadn't paid for and establish that she had the right to do it. It was the same psychology he'd seen in business negotiations, in family dynamics, in any situation where someone realized they could take more than they'd been given. She wants to win, he said. Exactly. So you have choices. You can fight her, which is expensive and uncertain. You can compromise, which teaches her that aggression works. Or you can do something else entirely. Like what? Priya smiled, and it wasn't a warm smile. That depends on how far you're willing to go. Over the next week, Marcus descended into research. He pulled his utility bills for the past year. He calculated exactly how much electricity the charger drew per kilowatt hour, what the rate was, how much each charge would cost him. He documented every date and time Diane had used the charger, cross-referencing it with the charger's app, which recorded all usage. Diane's Tesla used about 40 kilowatt hours to fully charge. At his local rate, that was approximately $14 per charge. She'd used it 17 times in the past month alone. He wrote down a number, $238, then he opened a business accounting application and created an invoice. It was professionally formatted, printed on plain white paper with no business name, just his name and the date. Line item: unauthorized use of residential electrical charging infrastructure, 17 instances. $14 per use. $238. Past due amount due within 30 days of receipt. He mailed it to her registered address. 2 days later, his phone rang. It was Diane, and she was not trying to hide her fury. "This is harassment," she said, her voice sharp enough to draw blood. "I'm not paying some made-up bill because you're angry I used your charger. It's not made up. It's the exact cost of the electricity. And according to your lawyer's letter, if the charger is in a community space with implied shared use, then shared use means shared cost responsibility. That's not what—" "Either pay the invoice," Marcus said, "or we can litigate about whether you owe rent, electricity, and damages for unauthorized use of my property. Your choice." He hung up. That night, he received an email from Diane's lawyer. A cease and desist letter claiming extortion and demanding he issue a corrected bill of $0 or face criminal charges. Marcus printed it out, highlighted the sections, and sent it to Priya with a note. She escalated. "Now what?" Priya called him back in 20 minutes. "She's made a mistake," Priya said, and there was an edge of satisfaction in her voice. "Filing a cease and desist for payment owed is itself potentially actionable. And now we have documentation of her legal team doing something arguably inappropriate. Here's what we do." Marcus's consulting business had taught him one critical skill: patience. He could watch a problem develop, identify the patterns, and wait for the exact moment when action would yield maximum effect. He'd made 6 figures using this skill. It had also made him careful about when to deploy it. This was the moment. Following Priya's advice, Marcus took a different approach. Instead of engaging directly with Diane, he filed a formal complaint with the HOA board requesting an emergency meeting about unauthorized utility usage. He included photographs, invoices, charger usage logs, and his original installation permits. He copied Diane's lawyer on the filing. Then he did something more strategic. He contacted a renewable energy nonprofit that had been trying to establish a charging equity program in the county. He mentioned that his neighborhood had an interesting situation where a shared EV charger was creating community benefit, but also raising questions about liability and management. Would they be interested in documenting the case? They were extremely interested. Within a week, the nonprofit had contacted the HOA board, asking if they could study the innovative shared charging model in the neighborhood as a potential pilot program for sustainable development. This would look good for the board: progressive, environmentally conscious, community forward. The catch was that any shared-use charger required proper legal documentation. liability insurance, maintenance agreements, and cost-sharing protocols. Basically, if they were going to share it, they were going to have to formalize it as a community amenity, which meant the HOA would have to pay for maintenance, insurance, and regulatory compliance. The estimated cost, $4,000 annually. Gerald called an emergency board meeting. Marcus wasn't invited, but Priya attended as his representative. She came back with news. The board had decided to recommend that Diane install her own charger on her property, with the HOA providing a one-time $500 subsidy from their sustainability fund as a neighborly gesture. That night, Diane's lawyer sent an email to Priya. My client is willing to drop all claims against Mr. Chen if he agrees to waive any claims for back electricity charges. Priya's response was immediate. Mr. Chen will agree to mutual non-interference and zero back charges if Ms. Morrison installs her own charger within 60 days and refrains from any use of Mr. Chen's equipment. Failure to comply will result in civil suit for utility theft in the amount of $2,340 with prejudgment interest and attorney fees. She'd calculated it. 17 charges at $14 each plus interest, plus the invoice amount she'd send if Diane didn't comply. Diane agreed that same day. Over the next 6 weeks, an electrician appeared at Diane's property and installed her own charger. It was identical to Marcus's, same brand, same specifications, except it was her property, on her driveway, with her electrical panel. Marcus watched the installation from his home office window, and he felt something he hadn't expected. Not triumph, but emptiness. He'd won, technically. He'd maneuvered, documented, escalated, and forced her hand. He'd used the system against her, but he'd also proven something to himself that he wasn't sure he liked. He was capable of being mean in a calculated, patient way. He was capable of looking at someone struggling financially and thinking not about compassion, but about leverage. The day after her charger was finished, he didn't see Diane leave her house at all. Her car sat in the driveway, fully charged. He wondered if she was in there, feeling the particular shame of having been outmaneuvered by someone she'd underestimated. He wondered if she was planning something. 3 weeks of silence. That's how long it lasted. Marcus had almost convinced himself it was over when his phone rang early on a Monday morning. It was his business accountant, Linda, and she sounded distressed. Marcus, can you get to your office? Now? What's wrong? I don't want to explain over the phone. Just come now. He drove to the small downtown office he maintained, and Linda was waiting with her laptop open, her face pale. She turned the screen toward him without speaking. His business accounts had been flagged. Someone had filed a complaint with the California franchise tax board claiming that Marcus had underreported income for the past 3 years. They were claiming he'd been doing consulting work under the table, failing to invoice properly, and had unreported cash income. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. This is false, Marcus said. Every single client I have is documented. Every invoice is recorded. I know, Linda said. I have all your documentation. But the complaint came from a CPA named David Cheng, and it's detailed. He's claiming that your invoice patterns show gaps, that your income should be higher based on your stated billable hours, and that you have unexplained deposits. What unexplained deposits? Linda scrolled to an attachment. There are 3 deposits in the $2,000, $4,000 range that don't have corresponding invoices. He's claiming they're unreported income. Marcus stared at the screen. He knew exactly where those deposits had come from. One was a tax refund, one was a bonus check from a former employer paying out accumulated PTO, and one was inheritance from his grandmother. All completely documented in his personal records, none of which were business income. This is harassment, he heard himself say. This is retaliation. But even as he said it, he knew the problem. Proving retaliation would require proving that Diane had filed the complaint, and she'd never do it directly. She'd hired someone, probably the same lawyer, to do it through an intermediary. The CPA was probably someone Diane didn't even know, hired through the lawyer's network. The investigation would take months. Even if it was resolved in his favor, the process would be devastating. Audits required full financial disclosure, which meant accountants' fees, legal fees, the stress of having every transaction examined. Even if he was vindicated, the cost would be enormous, and that was the point. That was the entire objective. Marcus called Priya. Her reaction was immediate. She got someone to file a false tax complaint. That's brilliant and infuriating. We need to report this. To who? The state bar for her attorney's ethical violations. But Marcus, this is going to be hard to prove. We need direct evidence of her involvement. What if we talk to her? Absolutely not without documentation, Priya said. No conversation, no recorded admission. Everything in writing or recorded in the presence of witnesses only. Marcus felt something break open inside him. The game had fundamentally changed. It wasn't about the charger anymore. It was about whether he would be destroyed for winning. He spent that night going through every interaction he'd had with Diane, looking for evidence of coordination. He found nothing directly traceable. But then, at 2 a.m., unable to sleep, he did something he'd never done before. He sent Diane a text message. This isn't going to end well for either of us. He waited, knowing she might not respond, knowing he might be giving her ammunition. At 6 a.m., she responded, "I don't know what you mean." He called her immediately. "What did you do?" he asked. "Goodbye, Marcus." She hung up. But in that brief conversation, something had shifted. She'd responded. She'd engaged, which meant she wasn't confident about what she'd set in motion. Over the next few days, Marcus made a decision that Priya advised against. He called the lawyer Diane had hired and requested a meeting without either of their lawyers present. Neutral territory, a coffee shop downtown. To his surprise, the lawyer agreed. The lawyer, whose name was Tom Brennan, was exactly what Marcus expected. Expensive suit, expensive watch, expensive everything. He ordered an $8 coffee and somehow made it seem like he was doing the shop owner a favor by being there. "So," Tom said, settling across from Marcus, "you wanted to talk?" "I know she didn't file that tax complaint herself," Marcus said without preamble. "I know you coordinated it. I want to understand what you think that accomplishes." Tom smiled. "I think it accomplishes exactly what it's designed to accomplish. It makes you understand that continued escalation has consequences that outweigh the benefit of winning a dispute over an electric vehicle charger. That's extortion. That's leverage," Tom said, and he had the confidence of someone who'd played this game many times before. "And before you get righteous, consider what you did to my client. You maneuvered her into a corner, made her look foolish publicly, and designed a situation where her only option was compliance. You weaponized the HOA board, the nonprofit, the local tax code. You were very efficient about it." Marcus couldn't argue with the accuracy of this assessment. "So, what's your proposal?" he asked. "Diane installs her charger, which, as you know, she's already done. You both go back to being neighbors who ignore each other. The tax investigation mysteriously gets a clean report from our CPA friend because it turns out he reviewed your records more carefully and everything is in order. Everyone moves on, and if I don't agree, then the investigation continues. It will be resolved in your favor eventually, probably, but it will cost you between $30,000 and $50,000 in legal fees and accountant fees. Your business will be under scrutiny for months. Your stress levels will be unmanageable. But sure, you'll win." Marcus felt the trap of it then, the beautiful, terrible trap. Tom was right. He would win, but the cost of winning would be higher than any loss. "She lied about the community property thing," Marcus said quietly. "She knew it wasn't real, and she lied." "She did," Tom acknowledged. "She also knew you'd call her on it, so she escalated. You escalated back, and now we're here, with both of you holding weapons pointed at the other. The question is whether you're willing to keep shooting." Marcus looked at this lawyer, this perfect, expensive, immoral instrument of the legal system, and he realized something. Tom didn't care about Diane. He didn't care about Marcus. He cared about precedent, about demonstrating that his client had teeth, about ensuring that future people would think twice before crossing someone he represented. "She'll try something else," Marcus said. "People like her always do." "Probably," Tom admitted. "But not about the charger. That issue is solved. Whatever comes next will be a new game. Marcus stood up. Tell her that I'm dropping the complaint about the tax investigation. Tell her that I'm walking away from all of this. But also tell her that I have documentation of everything. The HOA files, the emails, the charger usage logs, the letters from her lawyers. Tell her that if she ever comes near my property again, if she ever uses my utilities again, if she ever tries anything like this again, I'm going to file my own case and I'm going to prove that this was coordinated retaliation, and the consequences will be a lot more serious than we've seen so far. Tom's expression didn't change. I'll pass that along. One more thing, Marcus added. Tell her I'm sorry I was cruel about it. I didn't have to be. I could have just said no from the beginning, and we could have both moved on. I chose to win, and I made sure she knew she was losing. That was a choice I made. He left without waiting for a response. 6 months later, Marcus was in his home office when he heard the sound of an ambulance pulling up outside. Through the window, he could see paramedics rushing into Diane's house. He found out later, through neighborhood gossip, that she'd had a panic attack so severe it had triggered what her doctor thought might be a minor cardiac event. She was hospitalized for 3 days and diagnosed with anxiety disorder and depression. She'd apparently been barely functioning during the entire tax investigation, sleeping 2 hours a night, unable to eat. The investigation had ultimately come back clean. Her CPA had issued a formal report stating that all income was properly documented and reported. But the damage had been done. She'd spent months convinced she was facing criminal charges. Marcus felt nothing when he heard this. No satisfaction, no guilt, no triumph. Just a flat, strange numbness. A week after she came home from the hospital, Diane knocked on his door. She looked different, smaller, like something had been removed from her internal structure and she was collapsing inward under her own weight. She was holding a letter. I wanted to do this in person, she said, her voice hoarse. Even though my therapist said I should probably just mail it. Diane, let me finish. She held up the letter. I'm formally apologizing for attempting to use your charging infrastructure without permission. I was wrong. I was angry about my divorce and I took it out on you. I bullied you. And when you stood up to me, I retaliated by doing something unethical and harmful. I knew it was wrong while I was doing it. I did it anyway. She handed him the letter. I'm also paying you back the electricity costs you calculated with interest. She had a check in her other hand. It's $265. It's more than what you asked for because I want to be honest about what I actually owe. Diane, I was also going to my lawyer and have sent a formal retraction of any claims against you. I'm making sure the nonprofit and the HOA know that I was the instigator of this entire situation and that you were reasonable and within your rights at every step. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this because it's true and because I can't keep living with what I did. She was crying now, silently, tears running down her face without any of the histrionics Marcus might have expected. I don't expect forgiveness, she continued. I just wanted you to know that I recognize what happened. I recognize what I did, and I'm trying to be different now. She turned to leave. Diane, wait. She stopped. I'm sorry too, Marcus said. I could have been kind. I could have said yes the first time you asked about the charger. I could have helped you figure out your own solution instead of turning it into a battle. I won a war that didn't need to happen, and I won it by being vindictive about it. I made you lose as publicly as possible because it made me feel powerful. She turned back, and her face was open in a way it had never been before. So where does that leave us? She asked. I don't know, Marcus said. I don't think we're going to be friends. But maybe we could be neighbors again. Actually, neighbors. The kind that exist beside each other without warfare. She nodded slowly. I'd like that. She gave him the check, and he took it. And they stood in the doorway in the California afternoon light. Two people who had gone to war over nothing and had somehow survived the collision. The aftermath. 3 months later, Marcus's business had returned to normal. His tax records were clean. His reputation was unscarred. He'd won every battle and somehow lost something essential in the process, the ability to see winning as a simple, uncomplicated good. Diane started a support group for women going through divorces. She became an advocate for mental health awareness. She was, by all accounts, genuinely changed by the collapse of her own cruelty. Marcus wasn't sure if that was redemption or if it was just life shuffling forward. One evening, sitting on his porch with a glass of wine, he watched Diane pull her Tesla into her driveway. Her charger was running, a green light indicating an active charge. His charger sat idle beside it, unused and untouched for months. She waved at him from her car. He waved back, and that seemed like enough. Not forgiveness. Not friendship. But the kind of truce that only people who've been through something terrible together can understand. A mutual recognition that they'd both gone too far, that they'd both been capable of cruelty, that they'd both learned something about themselves that couldn't be unlearned. The Tesla hummed softly in her driveway, drawing power from her own installation, and Marcus realized something. None of it had ever been about the charger. It had always been about something smaller and more human, the simple desire to take what wasn't yours and make it yours anyway. The impulse to win even when the victory was worthless. The capacity to hurt someone because you could, because you were angry, because you had the leverage, and the terrible, difficult, necessary realization that having leverage doesn't make you right. It just makes you powerful. And power without wisdom is just a very efficient way to destroy yourself along with everyone else. Marcus finished his wine as the sun set behind the houses across the street, painting the sky in shades of amber and red. The chargers glowed in the dimming light. Two separate installations, two separate properties, two separate lives that had briefly collided and burned. Tomorrow would come, and the day after that, and they would continue to be neighbors. Not friendly neighbors, but civil ones. Not warm, but respectful. Sometimes that's the most victory anyone can really claim. Sometimes that's enough.